All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation on the trial master file, focusing on quality control. So the last few videos that we have been an overview of kind of what is the TMF and how does it play in a role, some basic information on clinical research. Today, we're diving a little bit deeper into what you actually do. What are you actually looking for on the documents as you perform this QC? Okay, so TMF QC. The purpose is to take all the TMF documents, right? And those are the documents that come from all these different functional groups. So you have all these departments in a company, in a biotech. Their overall goal is to make the success of this drug. So they want to make sure it gets approved by the FDA. And to do that, you need to prove that it is safe and that it works, right? And that's kind of the goal of a lot of the functions, is they're really focused on the drug, the manufacturing, making sure the drug gets out there safely, and then make sure that it actually gets given to the patients appropriately. There's documents on making sure that the patient is fully aware of what they're doing. So there's all these different safety, and kind of these documents are proof that the study was run properly. So that's what the TMF is, this collection of documents. And then when you're doing a QC, you're trying to make sure that the TMF meets the requirements. There is an ICH GCP, which we will go over later, and I already found it. There's a link I will send you that has a GCP training, which I think is really good. And also you can put it on your resume, and it's really useful. And will also give you, really solidify your understanding of the big picture. I think it's an 8-hour training though, totally optional. You don't have to do it. But I highly recommend it, and I've done it before, and it's on my resume. And it's just something else to have there, which is good. Then there's different like regulatory requirements. I also have a link for that. It's really dry, so I think we're going to have to make our own presentation on that. And then the sponsor is a company, what I refer to a lot as like the biotech, the person who owns the drug. There are different requirements that they've set, and they usually do this through what they're called SOPs, standard operating procedures, which is different documents on different subjects to say this is how we do it. So when you work for a company and you're doing TMF, when you join, you will get a copy of their SOP on how to TMF and how all the different aspects of TMF, including how they want you to QC. What do you fail? What do you pass? What do you do when you see something wrong? Who do you notify? How do you do it in the system? All of that is documented, and you follow this. So these series of trainings are really just to give you an idea and knowledge of like the content and the industry standards, but each company will have its specific requirements, and they'll ideally train you, right? But it's good to be fully aware of everything and to be able to hit the ground running. So that's why we want to help train you in TMF so you can be successful. And then there, you want to ensure that TMF is always inspection ready. And we'll go into this in the next 2 slides. So quality control is a system for basically verifying and maintaining the level of quality. And the industry standards of kind of like the requirements I think of is careful planning, use of proper equipment, continued inspection, corrective action as required. And then I mentioned inspection readiness. This is what we talk about when we say about an audit. The systematic and independent examination of trial-related activities in the documents to determine whether the trial was done properly and whether or not the data was recorded, analyzed, and accurately done according to the protocol, SOPs, GCP, and regulatory requirements. And we'll go over, I know that's a lot in that last sentence, protocol, SOPs, GCP, regulatory requirements. I touched on it a little bit, and we can definitely go into it more, but high level, the protocol, just in case that's a new term for you, protocol is a document that outlines the study. So a company, let's say they're running 10 studies, they should have 10 protocols, like the company should, and each study will have its own protocol, and it's basically how we're running the study. And it has everything from the schedule of like when each patient gets what dose. It has information on like what the drug does, and just all these details. It's usually like a 100-page document, that people who work on the study should be really aware of, and the people who are like conducting the study, like the ones who are giving the patient the drug, they need to be really aware of it to the point where we actually make them sign off on it. So in the protocol, and we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of missing pages, but in the protocol, it's a 100-page document. Let's say that the last page, page number 100, has a blank signature page. It says like, I verify this, and it has a page that has a spot for a signature, right? But that protocol is like one version, and it gets uploaded into the TMF as that one document. And so that's a good example of when you don't need a signature. There's a signature line, but that's not where the signature page goes. Then later in a different folder, from every single doctor, every single head doctor, right, the PI, the head doctor that's running the study will sign that. So you have a separate folder where you have all of the signatures. So just an example of a variation of when you have a separate part of the document that gets handed out and does require to be signed. So that's a little bit about what the protocol is. I just wanted to highlight that in case that was a new term for people. And if there's any terms that you see that you want to dive in deeper, I'm totally happy to do complete trainings on each document or set of documents or regulations. So just please reach out to me. Okay, so process quality specifications. This is just a little understanding of what we're looking at. So we have QC criteria, which is kind of what constitutes as a pass or fail for the document. This depends on the document type, but also a lot of times it depends on the company. Quality level, what are the expectations? And then kind of, as I mentioned, what's the escalation pathway? Who do you let you know? How do you let somebody know, and who are you letting know? And are you doing it within the system? Are you emailing people? That is something very different per each company, but the idea is you want to be able to identify what seems like a pass or fail. You're supposed to identify things that are issues. And then review percentage. This is a lot of times when a document is incoming into the system, you do like 100% review. You like look over the document, you mark anything that's wrong, you make sure the metadata is correct, and then typically you send it for a review, a second review. Somebody within the company will also review it. And that setup changes company per company, but that's kind of the standard. Is a lot of times you have two separate sets of eyes that look at this document and make sure that they feel like, yes, it's ready to go. Later, part of the process of the TMF also includes what I call a completeness review, where you look through all the documents as a whole, and you're looking at the TMF and saying, what's missing? And we'll go into this later, but for example, with monitoring reports, you're looking for the kind of confirmation letter saying, hey, doctor, I'm coming out to see the site, and then a report, and then a final letter, which is usually saying more on like, this is what I found, here's what we need to work on next time. So that's a document that has 3 parts to it. So while they're uploaded separately and they're separate, 3 separate documents, if you see one and you don't have the other 2, that means something's missing. And that's something that you can do in these completeness reviews. And so sometimes what you do is you review a percentage, because it's a lot of time, right? 2 people have already looked at the document, and then are you going to twice a year have everybody look at every single document? It's a lot of time and resources. That would be the best solution, but most companies can't afford that, right? So usually what you do is you do something along the lines of doing like, let's say an 80% check, or maybe even 100% check at a certain time point. And then from that time point, you just look at incoming documents, and maybe you do a spot check, 10%, 50%, whatever you want, whatever the company can usually afford, to make sure that your TMF is completely ready, that they feel confident that if an inspector came and took a look, they would not find anything missing, they wouldn't find any errors. And so that's why you do completeness review, but the review percentage does change. Okay. So there are 10 steps for document QC. The first 5 are much more like on the document. And I think in our part 2, we'll work through a little bit more on. And then 6 through 10 are just kind of additional items. The number 8 is kind of part of the actual, like what you're looking at on the document. So we'll go through each of these. Step 1. You're making sure that each document is legible. So you're making sure that you're able to read it. There's no blank copies, or a common issue is if somebody scanned it, they scanned it, it's like super dark. Used to be an issue all the time. I haven't really seen that as a big issue lately. I think just improved technology. Step 2, you're making sure all the pages are included. For example, if you look down here, there's a highlighted box that shows this is page 1 of 2. We're actually looking at a very common document called the 1572, which is given by the Food and Drug Administration. That's the FDA. This is the document they require. And we'll probably do a whole training on the 1572. But basically, it's a very important document. If you're running a study in the US, every single site has to have this, and it needs to be updated and maintained. But for example, here it says page 102, you need to make sure that it has both pages, right? So if you see page 102 and no page 2, that's an issue, and you want to note that. Or, as it says here, pages sometimes scan incorrectly, and maybe it's double-sided and they didn't know. So you have all the odd pages, something like that. So you're trying to make sure that all pages are included. Step 3, signature. You want to make sure that there are no signature spots left blank. Now, again, as I mentioned, this is where knowing your documents is important. There typically are small exceptions, and as I mentioned, the protocol and something very similar, the IB, are two big documents that both have signature pages on there. And in the actual upload of the document, that page is blank. It does not need to be signed. But then somewhere else, there needs to be for each site the appropriately signed signature line. So this is actually, this is an IB, investigator's brochure, has the date, and it has the signature and the signature date. So those are the two things you're looking for. And then there's actually, as you see here, edition 3. Usually there's multiple IBs, and so you want to make sure you have all of them and they're all signed. Step 4, document dates are present. You want to make sure it's in the correct format per your company standards. This is, again, one of those rules where it's like pretty standard, but if it's wrong, it's not as big of a deal, right? Because there's European studies and there's more of a European format. So usually the best situation is where sometimes it's written out, or what sometimes we do is we put the 12 in front of the month, so like 12 July 2017, just to clarify. I mean, here it's clear that we don't have, like, could this be July, so July 12th, or there could be the December 12th, right? For the December 7th for the European standards. So that's just something that it would be written out in company policies to make sure that you know how you want to do that. And then you just want to make sure that the document date is correct, and then the document date matches in your metadata. So as you're doing all of this, you'll have metadata, or usually a column on the side of the screen where you're making sure that what's in the system is matching what you have on the document. And that makes it a lot easier, as we'll talk about, to find in an audit and to be able to utilize your documents when they're properly named and all the metadata is correct. Okay, step 5. So this is when you are titling the document correctly. So you use the TMF reference model, and that's why I put a little image here. If you scroll to the right, there should be a column that is updated with the correct name. As Ken pointed out, in our example version, we don't actually have the naming convention in there, so we will populate that just for the sake of being able to do the practice project. But basically, it's per the company in terms of how they want to do the naming convention. So as we were as I gave an example right before we started, basically you can do something like, if you had a medical license and you wanted to do the naming, sometimes people would say like study number _ site name. And sometimes that, like, let's say they prefer the PI name. A lot of times, if it's Stanford University, certain people will want to call it, oh, well, the site is Stanford, or they'll want to refer to the site as the PI name. So let's say it's Dr. Jones. So you could say study number _ Jones _ and then you could put, like, let's say if we're doing medical license ML underscore, and then you put the actual name of who is the medical license. It could be Dr. Jones, or it could be his sub-I, Henry Smith or something like that, right? And so you would want to, how that order and how you capture that is typically something that the company comes up with. If you're using Viva, which is a common eTMF system, that sometimes has its own naming convention. So you just upload the document, you select the artifact name actually, but it'd be nice, I think they're eventually going to make it so you just select the number, and then it will try to populate the name itself as you enter in the metadata. So if it has a drop down saying whose document is this, and you put it's Dr. Jones's document, like it's his medical license, then it will properly populate, if that makes sense. And we'll go over a little bit more about the system, but in a sense, the system's becoming more and more technically savvy, in the sense that it'll help you name, and that helps it be really consistent, because that's a major issue when it comes to audits, is it however you name it. If you're naming it however you want to name it, then somebody else won't exactly know how to find it, right? And that's what down here, the example, if it's protocol amendment 2, you want to make sure it says that, not just protocol or protocol amendment, because you'll have both a protocol and a protocol amendment and protocol amendment 2, and you want to be able to distinguish in like a report format versus actually having to open each document. All right, step 6 is the document check if it's not a duplicate. And that, again, a lot of different eTMF systems have a way to look for that. But if you named it correctly, if you didn't name it correctly, it's going to have a trouble finding it. So that's one of the things where if you're doing that completeness review, you can catch it because you're looking for it again. And so that helps. It also helps that as you're going through things, you're looking at these documents so you're familiar with them. And then if you're doing, let's say you're doing one site at a certain time, you might notice, oh, I already have, like in this batch, I already have a medical license for Dr. Smith. And you're like, okay, that's weird. And you might go back and look at it and be like, oh, this is an old one, this is a new one. And we'll talk about that in a second. But, or it could be a duplicate. Like you could look, okay, these look exactly the same, they're a duplicate. You want to get rid of duplicates. They're not something that the FDA likes, because it's kind of a sign that you're not maintaining your TMF if you have all these duplicates in there. And it means that you never really looked. So you didn't really use your documents and you weren't really on top of managing your study. So it's just kind of like a red flag that they use against you. So it's one thing that recently they've been really on top of, and most companies really want to make sure there's no duplicates. Okay, step 7. This is linking documents. I won't go too much into this because it can be for a lot of different circumstances, but if there is a way where you do need to link something, you want to make sure that it works. And basically one quick example is regulatory usually has a packet, and it might have a whole bunch of different documents, like let's say 10 different documents. And instead of having one giant packet, which makes it really hard to use, right? Because it's digital, so you would pull it up and you have to look at the table of contents and then say, okay, page 17 is where I want to go. Because it's all these different documents together in a packet, they separate them out so they're easily accessible. But as a result, it'll have a link. So you'll have your document, but this document is linked to this other document. So you can kind of, in the metadata, you look down and there's a whole bunch of different links. You can click the link and find that other document that's associated with that document as like a packet. So you just want to make sure everything works, and that's just another thing to check as part of the QC. Sometimes it's not the QCer's responsibility to check, but it's just something to be aware of. Okay, we mentioned this a little bit. Expired documents. You want to make sure that things are up to date. Now, the industry standards for making sure CVs are within 2 years is kind of changing. So it kind of matters on what the company's policy is. It's never been a hard rule, but this is just like an industry standard to check, but it's a lot of extra work. Some people don't like to do it. And it's not, like I said, it's not, the FDA doesn't require it. They really don't require much, but they require you to prove that you're running your study appropriately. So that's kind of a very vague way of doing it, and there's standards to try to prove that, right? And so in this example, you can see an expiration of a medical license, and then you can note if it's expired. In our practice, because our practice documents are older documents or documents we've made, and we made them a little while ago, most of them will, let's say, be expired, but that's something just to watch out for. Okay, step 9 and 10 are additional items that I'm going to try to go over quickly because I do feel like we'll go into deeper depth maybe in this next presentation tomorrow. But basically, they're part of what we talked about as a completeness review, where if you know you have one thing, you can identify if other things are missing. And so I also gave this on this morning presentation, I talked a little bit about the importance of a monitoring report and how it can help you go above and beyond your job, right? Which is what we always want to do. We want to take it to the next level. And the next level is to really understand the study. And the monitoring report is a really critical document that is created each time a monitor goes out to a site, right? And so I talked about site being Dr. Smith's site at Stanford University, right? And Dr. Smith, let's say, has 10 patients and he's seeing all these patients. He's giving them all the drug, monitoring how they're doing, and just seeing if they're improving, right? And the monitor's job is a specific role. Sometimes it's called a CRA. They go out there and they look to see, to make sure that everything's running appropriately at the site. There might be documents they need to collect for the TMF. There might be issues. The site isn't following a certain rule, right? So the protocol, remember, is like your rule book. A lot of times, certain universities might think that they know better, right? These are highly intelligent people who are physicians, and kind of, you can think of it cream of the crop in the sense. Sometimes they don't really agree with the rule book, and they're kind of in a mentality where they're used to not always following the rule book. And there's times when they don't have to. If they feel like it's the patient's safety, then they can break the rules and go with the patient's safety. That's always the top priority. But doing that is called a protocol deviation, and we have to document all of those. So that sometimes they break the rules on mistake because, like I said, it's a 100-page document for the protocol, and so maybe they didn't read all of it, or maybe they don't fully grasp it. And so that's one issue, is a protocol deviation that the monitor is really in charge of maintaining. They need to catch when the monitor, when the PI, the head doctor, is breaking some of the rules. They also need to have overall thoughts on like how the study is going. So reading the monitoring report is a really good key insight because it gives you an idea of what the monitor, someone very experienced, feels like is an issue with the site. They will make literal lists on the follow-up letter of like, here are the issues I saw, here are the things we need to work on, Dr. Smith, right? And they'll put it in a nice little bullet point chart. And so that gives you an idea of, hey, it looks like something went wrong at this site. They're saying this patient got sick, but when I look all like the different SAEs, which is like a report when a patient gets sick, you're like, I don't see anything for this site. So those are little triggers, and realistically, that's the job. That's like somebody else's job. It's the clinical operations team job to catch that. They're the ones who are really managing the study. But if you, as a TMF specialist, can catch that, that helps the overall TMF be better, but it also helps show your knowledge. And also, if you wanted to, for example, move into clinical operations, that helps. It shows that you're fully understanding. And I think it is important to try, if you have the time, to read the monitoring reports to get an idea of how the study is going. And we can definitely dive in later, and I think it would be good to look at some monitoring reports together. Okay, and then step 10, we'll for sure go over this at a different time. This is where you're checking all of the people who are on the study and how if all of the materials are there for them, right? Part of the responsibility of the study team is to make sure that everybody who's on the study is appropriately trained and like doing their job in a sense. And the way you prove that is by making sure that you have everything for each person. And so that document that we saw in the beginning, called the 1572, is a document that highlights what kind of like which institution, who's on the study, and a couple other key information, like such as like what lab they're using, right? But you can use that to then identify who's on the study and what you should have. So this is, again, steps 9 and 10 are an aspect of making sure what's missing. You're putting the pieces together, right? There's an aspect of just looking at the document and making sure it passes. And then there's an aspect of like what's missing. How do I make sure that the TMF is ready for inspection? Okay, and then just a quick summary. We went over this before, but Alcoa C is kind of the standards for making sure that your document is ready. So it should be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, which means like timely, original, accurate, and complete. And so kind of those steps 1 through 5, and I think 8 also kind of covered a lot of this. But it's also, you'll get training per each company in terms of what they find is critical on what needs to be in a document, but you always want to keep this in mind. So yeah, and that should be everything. So please let me know if you have any questions. I'm definitely happy to dive deeper into any topics and do separate trainings on it. And then tomorrow we will have another very similar training on how to QC. And then Thursday we will have a very interactive QC meeting, and that was where I want you to be able to shout out or put in the comments, what do you think is missing with these documents? Do you think it passes? Yeah, thank you everybody. Appreciate you spending the time with